Hello internet friends! This video is a step-by-step tutorial for making this set-in sleeve sweater with a knitting machine. The pattern is available for free on my website. There's a link in the description. This is a pattern generator, so you can make a sweater for any sized person with any knitting machine and any kind of yarn. I'll be using my measurements in this video, and I'm about a ladies medium. I broke the video down into segments, so if you need help with just the sleeves or just the neckline, you'll be able to find that in the timeline. All right, let's get started. I'm using Lion Brand Faux Mo in Spice and Mustard. I did a review of this yarn if you want to learn more about it. My sweater took about 4 skeins. Start with a tension swatch that has been blocked. Mine is at tension 8 and I threw it in the wash. You'll need the gauge for the pattern. This is a fuzzy yarn, so I'm knitting with wax in my tension mast. The sleeves start with 2 inches of 1x1 ribbing, so cast on 60 stitches on waste yarn, then set both carriages to tension 0 and knit 1 row in the bottom color. Reset the row counter to 0 for your hem. Change the tension to 1 and set up for circular knitting. Then knit 2 rows to perfect the hem edge. Cancel the circular knitting and set your carriages to the ribbing tension. You will need 20 rows of ribbing total. Then transfer all of the stitches to the main bed for stockinette. Drop the bottom bed down. Swap out the sinker plate. Set your tension for stockinette, and start knitting. The sleeves are just a big trapezoid that gets wider towards the armhole. So for my sweater, I'll be increasing 1 stitch each side every 14 rows. Using a multi-prong tool, move your stitches over 1, and then pick up a purl bump to fill the empty stitch. Make sure to do this on both sides. Hang claw weights to make sure your edge stitches knit smoothly. My sweater is 2-tone, so I'm switching colors about halfway through the sleeve. And the increases continue. At row 172, it's time to bind off for the shelf. Bind off 6 stitches. I like to go around the gate pegs to keep the bind off even. The last stitch goes over the gate peg, and then very carefully I pull the stitches off. Use a claw weight to hold the flap out of the way, and then knit 1 row to get the carriage on the other side. The other shelf is done the same way. Now it's time to add the decreases for the sleeve head. I'm knitting about 36 rows with decreases every other row. The top of the sleeve is shaped with short rows. Put your carriage into hold position. Bring 2 needles into hold on the opposite side of the carriage, and then knit 1 row. Bring 2 more needles into hold on the other side, and then wrap the last needle to prevent a hole from forming. Continue in this manner until you have 10 needles in hold on each side. Keep moving your claw weights in so they put weight on the part of the work that's actually being knit. To finish off the sleeve head, push the needles back into work and then knit one row. When all of your needles are back in work, it's time to bind off. Again, I'm going around the gate pegs. You need 2 of these knit exactly the same way. I want to show you something about why it's so important to block and let your machine knits sit. These 2 sleeves were knit exactly the same way. Here's the top, here's the bottom. This one is an inch longer. This is the one I knit today, and this is the one I knit yesterday. Given time to sit and relax, the shape of the garment changes. The back also starts with 2 inches of ribbon, cast on 120 stitches on waste yarn. Perfect your selvage. Knit 20 rows. Transfer all the stitches to the main bed for stockinette. Get set up for plain knitting. Then knit 140 rows. This is just a big rectangle. I'm switching colors at row 70. At row 140, it's time to bind off for the shelf. Bind off 6 stitches. Hold the flap back with a claw weight and knit 1 row. Bind off 6 stitches on the other side as well. Reset the row counter to 0, then knit 9 rows, decreasing 1 stitch on each side every row, and continue knitting to row count 50. The back neckline and shoulders are shaped with short rows. Put your carriage into hold. Bring 64 needles into hold. We're going to work on 1 shoulder at a time. Knit 1 row, wrap the last needle, and then bring 4 needles into hold on the far side. Knit another row, wrap the last needle, and bring 2 needles into hold on the far side for the neckline. Make sure to add weight. Repeat this pattern 1 more time to finish shaping the neckline. Now the neck is finished and the shoulder is shaped by bringing 4 needles into hold every other row. Don't forget to wrap the last needle and move your weights in. Push the needles back into work. And now it's time to bind off. You want a nice stable bind off for the shoulder so that the sweater doesn't stretch out weird. Alright, that's one shoulder done. Reset the needles for the other shoulder. You can't just push them back in because the loops are already behind the latches and they will just fall up. Then work the shoulder and the neckline in exactly the same way. There's the second shoulder. Hold the shoulders back with claw weights and take the center off on waste yarn. There we have a back panel. The front is worked the same way from the hem to the armpits. 2 inches of 1x1 ribbing. Reset for stockinette. Knit 140 rows for the body. Switching colors at row 70. Bind off 6 stitches each side for the shelf. Decrease 1 stitch each side for the next 9 rows. And then knit to row count 50. The front neckline will be shaped with decreases and the shoulder shaped with short rows. We're working with one side at a time, so bring 56 stitches into hold. Move your weights under the stitches inward. Decrease 1 stitch on the left every row for 20 rows. You have to be careful with these decreases. Here I dropped a stitch. It's important not to panic. Just grab the latch hook tool, find your stitch, and put it back on the needle. Now the shoulder is shaped with short rows. Bring 4 needles into hold every other row. Don't forget to wrap the last needle. Carefully push the needles back into work to finish off the shoulder. And bind off. The other shoulder is shaped exactly the same way. Then the center front comes off on waste yarn. And there's the front of your sweater. The neckline is 1 inch of ribbing. Before we get started, we need to seam 1 shoulder together. Pick up 1 stitch on the bound off edge on each side, and it makes a pretty neat seam. Now that we have our shoulder seamed, we can pick up stitches along the neckline edge. I need about 132 stitches, so I'm pulling out needles about that far away and putting the end stitch on each. Then I'll pick up 1 stitch on either side of the shoulder seam and hang them about where it lays on the machine. The front neckline is longer than the back neckline, so it's not going to be at 0. Then pick a point about in the middle and start hanging stitches. The live stitches you're going to pick up every single one of, but the other edges you just kind of eyeball. So pick a point in the middle, pick up a stitch, and then pick a point in the middle and pick up a stitch until you have everything on the bed. Then it's time to get set up for knitting. Hang your weights. And then bring up the bottom bed for ribbing. Transfer every other stitch to the bottom bed for 1 by 1 ribbing. This is a little easier to do with the live stitches. The first row of ribbing is going to be a little tricky. Go slowly and make sure that all of your needles are knitting correctly. We need 10 rows of ribbing. I'm doing a sewn bind off, so we need a tail that's about 3 times the width of the work. Then I finish off with a few rows of circular waste yarn. Here's our neckline. The ribbing sewn bind off is a lot like a Kitchener stitch. Pick up an old stitch and then go through a new stitch. When you're happy with your ribbing, pull off the waste yarn. There's my stretchy bind off. To finish the neckline, sew the other shoulder. We're going to attach the sleeves before we sew up the side seam. The sleeves can be a little tricky, so I like to find the center point, mark it, and then pin it to the shoulder seam so I know where it's supposed to sit. Then sew up 1/2 starting at the underarm. Then the same thing for the other side starting at the underarm. I like to try my sweaters on in the intermediate stages just to see how they look. It always feels a little ridiculous, but I enjoy the process. From here, finish the side seams and the sleeves with a mattress stitch. It's done! Well, it's mostly done. The sleeves are too long because it's not blocked yet, and this yarn will shrink up a bit, but overall it turned out pretty good. My favorite part is removing the waste yarn. Here's the sweater blocked and washed. You can see the sleeves are now an appropriate length. This is going to be a great fall sweater. It is so warm and fuzzy. Let me know in the comments below which machine you work with and what kind of yarn you'd make this sweater out of. If you found this tutorial helpful, please like and subscribe for more machine knitting tutorials. Happy knitting!